Town of Liars by M.B. Whitehill, Book 1 in the Appleton series. Prologue. The interview was being conducted in Xander's basement. He kept referring to it as his studio, and while it looked nice, it was still his basement, regardless of what he called it. In fact, it wasn't even his basement, as I knew this was his parents' house. Few people his age could afford their own house, and I knew Xander's podcast wasn't particularly successful. Xander was in his early 20s and had a long red beard that must have taken years to grow out, as well as an impressive handlebar mustache and comically large glasses that covered almost half of his face. When I'd researched his podcast, I'd noticed that they would constantly slide down his nose and he would have to push them back up at least once a minute. "Very nice to meet you, Detective," he said when he opened the door at the side of his house that led into his studio. Despite being taller and much heavier than me, he insisted on squeezing my hand very tightly during our initial handshake, as if to make a statement of how strong he was. If it was meant to impress or intimidate me, it didn't work. "Pleasure to meet you as well," I said. "And just George is fine." Xander led me down the narrow stairwell into his studio. The walls were wooden, but it wasn't a cheap wood like many of the houses around here had. This was an aesthetic that he had specifically chosen. On the far wall was a neon sign which I knew read True Crime, true spelled with two O's and crime spelled with a K, which was the stupid name they had chosen for this show. I only knew that's what it said because Xander had mentioned the name of the show when he first reached out to me. If I was trying to guess just by reading the squiggly letters flashing in an obnoxious green light, I wouldn't be able to make it out. In the middle of the room was a large table with all of his equipment, including several laptops and a pair of large, expensive microphones. "So this is where the magic happens," Xander said as we walked over to the table. "Do you want water or anything?" he asked. "Water would be nice," I said. "Don't need it now, but I imagine I will later after we've been talking for a few hours." As Xander walked over to the small fridge in the corner, I noticed a small desk off to the side where Xander's co-host was sitting. He must have noticed my eyes wander in that direction. "Oh, George, this is Julie," he said. His co-host had been staring at her computer the whole time and didn't even look up to acknowledge me. "Hi," was all she said. Julie was the polar opposite of Xander. Her hair had 4, maybe 5 different colors in it, and she looked to weigh around 50 pounds. They had different last names, so I figured they weren't siblings or married. I wondered how they had ended up working together and tried to convince myself that there was no way the two of them were sleeping together, since she would probably die under him. Although she might appear harmless, I knew from my research that she was the one I needed to worry about. Xander had a cheerful demeanor and would spend the whole interview talking to me like we were just two guys having a fun conversation, and once my guard was down, she would be the one to ask difficult questions to try and trip me up. "Okay," said Xander as he placed 2 water bottles on the side of the desk that I was going to be sitting on. Now, most of the story is public knowledge, so if someone really wanted to, they could just go online and see who died, who survived, who went to prison, but there are a lot of people who listen to this who want to go into it completely blind, no spoilers, so if you can try to just not jump around in the story and go chronologically, that would be appreciated. "Sounds good to me," I said. As he spoke, I noticed that Xander was doing his best to maintain eye contact with me, but his gaze kept lowering slightly to my nose. I did my best not to laugh. He had just asked me not to jump ahead on the story, but I knew he couldn't wait to ask me about it. The two of them spent the next few minutes setting everything up, and finally we were ready to go. "I am really excited about today's show," Xander said into the microphone. "We are joined today by Detective George Hoffman, who was the lead investigator in the town of Appleton during what has become known among true crime enthusiasts as the Insomniac Incident." I always felt unfairly overhyped in these introductions, being talked about as though I was some big hero, which never felt earned. But I knew that this praise Xander was giving me might just be part of his plan to later catch me off guard with some question. Over the last 6 years, I had done countless interviews like this. The story about what happened in Appleton in 2009 had developed a cult following over the years, with everyone discussing and analyzing all of the details. There were some who thought the details of the story didn't add up. Xander wouldn't be the first one to try and discover some clue that no one else had and figure out what really happened. They always had some theory that they would try to prove. None had been successful so far. I'd listened to a few episodes of Xander's show before agreeing to come on, and truthfully, it was far from the worst show I had been on. He was perfectly fine as an interviewer, although on a day when everyone seemed to be starting their own podcasts, he did little to stand out from the crowd. "Before you say anything else," I said, "we're not supposed to call it the Insomniac Incident. I know that's the name that people gave it online, but the company behind Insomniac has been known to take legal action against those who claim they are damaging their brand." "You're right," Xander said, gritting his teeth. He knew he should have caught that, and I shouldn't have to tell him how to do his job. "I usually just refer to it as that case," I told him, "because of all the ones I worked, this is the one that stands out the most." "Yeah, I can imagine," said Xander. He turned over to Julie. "Might as well just call it the Appleton case, then?" She nodded, not looking up from her screen. "So, I thought we would start with something light," said Xander. "What is the Peacekeeper pub crawl?" I had wondered what the first question would be, and this wasn't what I expected. I couldn't help but start laughing. "Ah, I haven't thought about that in so long." "Peacekeeper pub crawl," I said. Well, every year right after Christmas, our boss would take the whole police department out for drinks. And this wasn't just he buys one round for everyone. No, you drink as much as you want and he pays for everything. If you puke or get kicked out or start a fight, well, then it's over. But if you can manage to stay on your feet, he's got you covered. Now, the catch was that this event only takes place if our town goes the entire year without any murders. Xander nodded his head as he processed this, causing his comically large glasses to tilt down his nose. As he adjusted them, Julie piped in. But isn't that kind of luck? She asked, unless you can somehow prevent murders before they happen. That's true, I said slowly. I was beginning to understand why they had begun with this question. It seemed innocent enough. They weren't immediately asking me about any grisly details or about my opinions. They were already trying to find holes. But they wouldn't. Eventually, the boss changed it so that if there were murders and we managed to solve them, then he would still take us out. As you say, it is basically luck, so if our luck is bad, we have the chance to make things right. Julie's expression didn't reveal whether she was satisfied with this answer or not. I was right that in this dynamic she was going to be the bad cop, for lack of a better term. Xander would be the nice one who just wanted to hear me tell my story, while she would be the skeptical one asking questions to see if she could find a crack that no one else had been able to. And this boss was Dennis Willard, yes? Xander asked. Or did the chief before him start this? No, it was Dennis who started it, I confirmed. He became chief, I want to say 3 or 4 years after I joined. I could tell that Xander wanted to ask questions about Dennis, question about things that happened later. So just to give us an idea, Xander continued, what were the murder rates like in Appleton in a normal year? In a normal year? I repeated. Honestly, often zero. I know everyone says that their town is boring, but I really mean this. Nothing ever happened in Appleton. It was a small, quiet town. What would have been a bad year? Xander asked. Before 2009, I mean. I exhaled. 2005, I think we had three. That was probably the worst year I had seen. Two of those were related, if I remember right, but still, three murders in a single year was quite the shocker. And then 2009 happened, said Xander. And then 2009 happened, I remembered with a sigh. It was the last Monday before Christmas when we found the first body, and by the end of the year we were up to five. Jesus, said Xander. And the shit show didn't even end there, I said. Then I frowned. We can say shit on this show, right? Or do you have advertisers who will get mad? I asked. Oh, the advertisers won't care, Xander assured me. We talk about dead bodies on this show, it's fine. He paused and gently tugged on the end of his handlebar mustache, the tip almost touching the bottom of his enormous glasses. So when you got called to that first body, had you already met Evan Doherty? No, I had actually been off the week before. I had a bunch of vacation days left over, and Evan had joined the team during that week I was gone. So I didn't meet him until the day we found the first victim. It was actually at that crime scene. And what kind of first impression did you get from him? Xander asked. I made a slightly exaggerated humming noise and drummed my fingers on the desk to give off the impression that I was thinking. I had been over this story so many times, I had all the details ingrained into my brain, but I always had to make sure to be careful. You know how different people deal with personal tragedies in different ways? I asked. One person will cry for hours every day, another person just shuts down, doesn't really say much. Someone else acts like everything's fine and just goes about their day. Yeah, said Xander, who was nodding the whole time I spoke. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. Everyone just processes it in their own way. And this job is the same as that. I don't know if you've ever seen a murder victim, and I don't mean like crime photos or a documentary. No, actually seen it right before your own eyes. There's nothing that prepares you for that. The knowledge that this was a person and then someone did this to them. And everyone in this line of work deals with this in their own way. Some of us are visibly shaken by it, others are shaken but don't allow themselves to show it. The point is that my first interaction with Evan Doherty was watching him step out of his car, approach the crime scene, and react to what he saw. And how did he react? Xander asked. 1. On the last Monday before Christmas 2009, I awoke on the couch in our living room to the sound of the front door slamming shut. Even after all this time, instinct kicked in that there was some kind of danger, only for me to remember half a second later that Martha was going out for her run. Back in the summer, she had told me she was going to start running at the crack of dawn. She had asked me if I wanted to participate as well, but I used the excuse of working inconsistent hours, which wouldn't allow me to have a routine running schedule. I'd thought that once it got cold out and the days got much shorter, she would give up on this, but she was consistent and continued to run every morning, never missing a day. I was immediately filled with that annoyed feeling one always felt on their first day back at work after being off for a while. The past week I had actually managed to spend time with my family. It had been a bad feeling when I realized that I didn't really know that much about my children, beyond their names and physical appearances. Last week, when Hope and I had been building a particularly fat snowman, I realized that I was still talking to her in that condescending tone people use when talking to a baby, even though she was already 4 and could understand normal sentences. She didn't seem to mind, however. She was happy that I was spending time with her for once, and wouldn't stop asking me questions about work. From what I gathered, she would always ask Martha about my job, but Martha had decided to do her best to shelter our children from the details of police work. I wasn't supposed to talk about crime or drugs or dead bodies or anything like that. But now that it was just the two of us, Hope had figured she could try and get some more exciting answers out of me. On the other hand, Carrie, who was 8, didn't seem fazed by the fact that I was home all week. She kept in her room as she always did. Carrie was always reading something and only left her room to eat, and even when she did, she still brought whatever she was reading with her. The few attempts I made to have a conversation went nowhere. When I asked if her favorite singer had released anything new, she muttered that she had grown out of that a couple of years ago. I was glad Martha wasn't around to hear how outdated my notes about my children's interests were. Yesterday I had been filled with a sense of panic about all the things I had said I'd wanted to do during my small vacation, things I knew I had to cram into the last few hours. I ended up coming home very late. In fact, I barely remembered coming home, but I must have been exhausted if I decided to fall asleep on the couch. I saw on my watch that it was already past 6 and I had to be leaving. When I got off the couch, I felt a cramp in my legs, likely caused by the fact that the couch was slightly too short for me and I'd slept with my legs curled up. I had brought this up to Martha in the past, and her response was that I should just sleep in the bed instead. Since I was already running late, I made the decision to just go to work in the clothes I was wearing yesterday. No one would notice, as no one from work had seen me yesterday. Before leaving, I walked down the hallway and peered into the two smaller bedrooms in which our kids were still asleep. In the kitchen, there was a half-full pot of coffee from the day before, which I poured into a mug and drank in seconds as I didn't have time to put on a fresh one. Just as I was putting the now empty mug away, I noticed that my phone was on the counter. That's right, I had left it at home the night before. When I looked at it, I saw that Dennis had called just 10 minutes ago. I must have slept right through it. I listened to the voicemail and found out that someone had reported finding a dead body at the edge of town. I sighed. I had hoped that my first day back would be uneventful so I could ease back into things, but it looked as though this quiet year was about to come to a grim end. The act of putting shoes on took more energy than I liked. If I told Martha about this, her natural response would be that I should be joining her on these runs she was taking at sunrise. Sometimes I wondered whether she was trying to get in better shape so she could leave me. As I straightened up, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Despite having gone through a physical ordeal the night before, I was still looking out of shape and old. By now I had gotten used to my hair turning gray, at least the parts of it that weren't disappearing entirely. I had naively hoped that a few days of not working would restore my youth, but that was a fantasy. I'd even gotten rid of the beard to try and look younger, but that hadn't done anything either. I knew the real reason I was aging was because I wasn't sleeping much. My green eyes were encircled by bright red veins that were bursting, a clear sign that I wasn't taking care of myself. As I looked for other aspects of myself to hate, I noticed that I was frowning. Hope had asked me about that the other day. She was still at the age where a child is filled with a sense of wonder, and she couldn't understand why I was always frowning. I didn't have a good answer for that question. I wished I could be as blissfully happy as her. As I drove toward the northeast end of town, I ended up stopping to buy an actual warm coffee as well as a muffin. I had sworn off donuts when I first joined the force because I refused to be what people expected me to be. The road to the edge of town was a narrow path that was technically classified as a highway, even though it was only one lane in each direction. The paint used to indicate where each lane ended had faded years ago, and the road was defiled with long cracks that caused my car to continuously bounce up slightly. Off to the side were flat fields, several miles in each direction, covered by a thin blanket of snow. In the distance were bare trees which did their best to block out the first rays of sunlight on the horizon. As the road turned to the left, I hit another bump which caused me to let go of my muffin as I gripped the steering wheel with both hands. It disintegrated in the air and sprinkled my shirt with crumbs. I tried my best not to get annoyed, as I knew I would have to be focused on the work ahead. When I arrived at the crime scene, I was surprised to see Dennis there. There were two police cars parked at the side of the road, their lights still flashing, illuminating the dark sky with alternating bursts of blue and red. There was also a large truck parked a little further up the road. And then there was the sign. Here at the edge of the town were two large wooden beams with a sign nailed to them which read, "Welcome to Appleton, population," and then a faded number underneath, which the town had stopped repainting due to the number always changing. "There you are," said Dennis as I got out of the car. Dennis had always looked old, ever since I had first joined 10 years ago. He always gave off the impression of an elementary teacher who had given up telling his students to behave, but today he looked particularly defeated. I knew it was probably because of the body. Crimes like this were rare, and when they happened, it was a grim reminder of the kind of job we had signed up for. Dennis was standing with another officer who I couldn't recognize due to how dark it still was. They were talking to a rather fat man who I assumed was the driver of the truck. If I had to guess, he was the one who found the body. "Didn't expect you here," I said. I realized I had gotten out of the car with my coffee and it was too late to hide it. I noticed it at the same time as Dennis did, when his eyes tilted down and his thick eyebrows shot up in the opposite direction, causing the snow to fall out of them and land in his mustache, which itself was already coated in snow. "Oh, I see you were in a hurry to get here," he said. I frowned. "The victim's already dead. They're not going anywhere," I replied. Dennis looked like he wanted to say something in response, but he stayed quiet. Then he frowned and pointed at my shirt. "You got something there," he said, "some kind of stain." I looked down and saw a small purplish blotch on my shirt. "Shit," I said as I licked my finger and tried to smear it. I dropped my muffin while I was driving. The jam had already dried on the white fabric. Or was that the jam? Maybe this was from yesterday and I hadn't noticed. So, where is it? I asked a moment later. Come, he said and motioned me towards the sign. I should have been prepared for what I saw, but I was still taken aback. The welcome sign that I had seen hundreds of times throughout my life and was burned into my brain now had a body nailed to it. It was a woman. She was pinned to the left beam with nails going through her feet and her right hand, which hung by her side. Her left hand had been stretched across the top of the sign and then nailed in place, her palm hovering over "Welcome." Jesus, I said. Yeah, Dennis said. It's fucked up. I looked over at the truck driver who was still being questioned. The officer's voice sounded like Ross. That the guy who found her? Yep, Dennis said. Called it in less than an hour ago. Said he almost swerved into the ditch when he saw the sign. The woman was naked, and it was clear by the bluish tint of her skin that she had frozen to death. I looked around the fields, but it was still too dark to see anything. How close is the nearest house, do you think? I asked. Dennis thought. Not sure. I think there's that dairy farm a few minutes' drive from here. Why? I took a step closer to the body and strained my neck up. The woman's mouth was slightly open, but it appeared unblocked. Would they have heard her screaming? I asked before turning to Dennis. Or do you think she was already dead when she was put here? From the looks of it, no, said Dennis as he two-stepped closer. No immediately visible wounds beside the nails. We'll see. Maybe Joel will find something. Before either of us could say anything else, there was a sound of tires crunching over gravel. I turned and saw another car slowly pull up to where we were. I can take care of this, I said as I began to make my way over. The last thing we needed was someone showing up right now and getting in our way. Wait, said Dennis. He's one of ours. Dennis claimed the car belonged to a cop, but the man who stepped out of the driver's seat wasn't anyone I had ever met before. One of ours? I asked Dennis. Yeah, he joined the team last week while you were gone. I told you before you left we're having someone transferred over. I thought back and vaguely remembered Dennis saying something like this a while ago. But still, seeing this person walking over to us, I thought there had to be a mistake. The new officer approaching looked like he was fresh out of school. He couldn't have been older than 20. He was wearing an oversized black coat that contrasted his hair, which was a pale blonde, almost the same shade as the snow that was falling and landing in it. I noticed that he too had a coffee, which he could barely hold in the giant fluffy mittens he was wearing, but Dennis didn't seem to mind that he had gotten coffee before work like I had. Fuck, it's cold here, he said as he exhaled. George, this is Evan, Dennis said, introducing us. Evan, George. Hi, Evan said, but he wasn't looking at me. He had just noticed the body and was staring up at it in amazement. And then he started laughing. At first I was confused. I turned to Dennis, but he seemed exhausted, as if he had already gotten used to this kind of behavior. Sorry, something funny? I asked. Evan managed to pull himself together and stop laughing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make light of this, it's just... And he turned to Dennis. You told me nothing ever happens in this town. Like a few days ago you said that. Well, I'm glad you've managed to prove me wrong, Dennis replied, but Evan had already turned his attention back to the body. He took a few steps closer and started rummaging through his pocket before pulling out his phone. He raised it up and a flash of light briefly illuminated the scene. Are you fucking serious? He asked. I turned to Dennis in disbelief, but he just shook his head. Is he... I began to ask again. Don't, Dennis whispered quietly. Evan seemed to have not even heard us as he put his phone away. Before he could say or do anything else, the other officer came over. I was right, it was Ross, who had begun to grow the thinnest wisp of a mustache while I was gone to appear slightly older. Ross was typically the thinnest person in our office, but out here no one would have guessed, as he was bundled in so many layers that it made him the fattest. Looks like his story checks out, he said in his unusually high voice, looking back at the truck driver who was standing further away. Says he takes this road a couple times a week. That the guy who found her? Evan asked, peering over at the driver. No one answered him. Do you want to bring him in, just in case? Ross asked. You might as well, said Dennis. See if you can call the employer, confirm that this is normal. Do we have an alibi for yesterday? Says he was home, sleeping, Ross said with a shrug. Can anyone confirm that? Evan asked, before Dennis could give an answer. Dennis turned to him and looked like he wanted to say something unprofessional, but he managed to restrain himself. We'll bring him back to the station, but for what it's worth, I doubt it was him. Why, because he's too fat to lift her up? Evan asked. Okay, that's enough, Dennis said. While they bickered, I walked back over to the sign and stared up at the body. The victim's hair was a mess, the result of the wind blowing at it for hours. Recognize her? Evan had somehow materialized right beside me. No, I said. Why? He shrugged. Figured it's a small town, everyone knows each other. I think that's just an expression. We don't literally all know each other. But he wasn't listening. His eyes narrowed as he stared up at the body. Does it look like she's pointing at something? The hand which was raised across the sign had one finger extended out, while the others were all curled down. I don't know, I said. Could be that's just how the hand was before she died. Could be, he said. Or she could be pointing at something. I looked in the direction that the finger was apparently pointing at. There was nothing but empty fields, and even though it was too dark, I knew the city was just on the horizon. Maybe, I said. Where did you find this guy? I asked. I was sitting in Dennis's office several hours later. The dead woman had been removed from the site and was currently being examined by our coroner. Dennis had made a statement to the press and asked anyone who may have information to come forward. As of now, he had been unable to identify who the woman was. I owed somebody a favor, Dennis replied as he lit a cigarette. Dennis still smoked indoors, and I had never seen him angrier than when someone made the mistake of telling him he wasn't supposed to do that. I wondered whether Evan had done this last week, or if he thought the idea of Dennis smoking at work was amusing. I know he seems a little obnoxious, but I was told that professionalism aside, he is good at his actual job, Dennis continued. I turned and looked out the window where I could see Evan at his new desk. He appeared to be scribbling something down on a notepad. What do you think about what we saw this morning? He asked. I turned back to Dennis. I don't know what to think, I said. I was trying my best to put the woman out of my mind. We're going to need to solve this one fast, said Dennis, gritting his teeth. The last thing we need around Christmas is people worrying about a murderer on the loose. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Dennis looked up and nodded. Evan walked in and immediately sat down in the chair beside me. I was glad that he had left the door slightly ajar. I had never gotten used to Dennis chain-smoking in his office. It was something he seemed to only do when he was stressed, and given what he had just said about Christmas panic, I imagined that this was a bad day for him. Wanted to see me? Evan asked. Yes, I want to talk to you about your conduct this morning, said Dennis. Oh, is this about the picture? Don't worry, I haven't shown that to anyone. That's just for studying. Studying? I asked. The picture of the dead, naked, crucified woman, that's for studying? Oh, yeah. Evan nodded as if this was normal. He lifted one leg up and rested it on his knee, the tip of his shoe pressing against Dennis's desk. Dennis didn't say anything, but I saw by the way his jaw got tighter that he looked as though he was about to start yelling. I'm gonna make one of those boards in my house, you know, the one where you connect all the photos with yarn? Once the next victim shows up, I can start connecting. What do you mean, the next victim? I asked. Evan looked puzzled, as though I had just asked a stupid question. You think this was his first one? He asked and shook his head. No, this was done by a professional. Neither Dennis nor I knew what to say, and Evan looked at each one of us, seemingly still unsure what the problem was. Okay, can I ask just between us? He said. Have either of you ever killed anyone? Oh, Jesus Christ, said Dennis, burying his head in his hands while being mindful of the cigarette he was still holding. I stared at Evan for a moment with my mouth open as I tried to decide whether the entire office had decided to pull a prank on me while I was gone. No, I lied. Have you? Nope, Evan replied quickly. A little too quickly. But if I did, I wouldn't nail the body to a sign on the highway. Whoever did this wanted us to find her. See, this is what I'm worried about. If they had tried to hide the body and did a shit job and someone ended up finding it, then I'd be like, okay, we're dealing with an amateur, someone who's probably never done anything like this before. If they've made one mistake, they might make another. We'll get them in no time. But this, we're dealing with someone smart. This guy had to know that we would find the body fast, and he was confident that he hadn't made any mistakes which would help us find him. You say this guy, I repeated. You're assuming that the killer was male? Evan tilted his head. Come on, man, you saw that shit. That was almost ritualistic. And that's another thing. Do you know how long it takes to crucify someone? Again, I wasn't sure if this was a serious question that he wanted me to answer. I looked over at Dennis, who just shook his head, indicating that he wasn't in the mood to have this conversation. This wasn't a quick bullet to the head or a shove down a flight of stairs, Evan continued. This shit took time. It's fucking freezing cold outside, but this guy was determined to nail her up, and he had to know that all it would take was one car to drive past her in that whole episode and he would be caught. Unless he was planning on removing any potential witnesses, too. He looked at us, waiting for one of us to answer or pitch our own ideas. When neither of us said anything, he clapped his knees and stood up. So when was the last time you guys had a murder like this? Actually, is there a map of the town anywhere? I want to see if there were any landmarks nearby that you might have been pointing to. Oh, this again. What is he talking about? Dennis asked me. Just a theory I got, said Evan, and he turned to leave the room. We're not done. Sit back down, said Dennis. Once Evan was seated, Dennis continued. I want the two of you working this case together, he said. Evan and I both began to explain that this was a terrible idea at the same time. Sir, I can handle this on my own, Evan began. I am scared to imagine what your idea of handling this would be, Dennis replied, and he turned to me. Please don't do this to me, I exhaled. I don't want to fucking babysit this guy. I'm right here, thanks, Evan said. You're going to work it together because I told you I wanted it solved fast. Why not get Ross to do it? He already questioned the truck driver, I suggested. Truck driver's not our guy, Dennis said. Plus, I already had him working on other stuff. I want you both on this one. He leaned in and seemed to relax a little. Look, right now your theories, he emphasized the word, are just that, theories. And they are going to stay theories until you have something concrete. I don't want you shouting your ideas out to just anyone. Evan opened his mouth to disagree, but Dennis lifted a hand. But between us, I do think that you're right. Whoever did this was not something new to them. They knew what they were doing, and they're taunting us right now. Once Evan left the office, I turned back to Dennis, but he was ready. I know you don't want to work with him, and I frankly don't care, he said. I opened my mouth to argue, but Dennis wouldn't give me a chance. I'm not punishing you. I'm doing this because I trust you to control him and stop him from ripping the town and have to find this person. I frowned. I understand, I said. Interlude. I'm already exhausted just listening to you explain what he was like, Julie said. I know what you mean, I said. It felt strange painting such a negative picture of Evan on this podcast, but I had to be honest about our initial interactions. And yet it would seem he was right about almost everything, Xander said. I tried to keep a straight face. There was something about the tone in which he said it, the wording, it would seem. He didn't believe the story. Over the years, there had been countless theories about what really happened in Appleton and which details were apparently made up. And I understood now that Xander was one of the people that doubted Evan's role in what happened. So Dennis had told you that Evan was transferred over, right? Xander asked me. Yeah, I repeated. He owed someone a favor, I believe were his words. I assumed it was the police chief or mayor or someone like that in the city Evan was from. But he didn't mention the reason Evan had been transferred. No, I said. I didn't really think about it that much at the time. I imagined that if I had given it some thought, I would have reached the conclusion that he was probably transferred because people thought he was difficult to work with. Xander gave a small laugh. What was the mood in the town like after that first victim was found? I stared down at the table and thought for a moment. It was uneasy, he said finally. There's this weird anticipation almost, because I didn't recognize the victim, none of us did, but you realize that even if you didn't know this person, you probably know someone who did know them, and that someone's about to have the worst day of their life. Someone's about to spend Christmas without a loved one in just a few days, so Dennis really pushed us to find who did this right away. Right, Xander agreed. And despite everything else, I think it's safe to say that Evan was right about this not being done by an amateur. Oh, absolutely, I said. We'd never seen anything like this before. We had seen the odd husband killing a wife or someone getting hit by a drunk driver, but this was self-expression. Evan caught on to that immediately. Do you think, Xander began, and I'm just picking this up from how you've been describing him, do you think he was a little too enthusiastic about this case? I think he really enjoys having a mystery to solve, I said after a moment. I like when my job is boring because that typically means that everyone's alive and healthy, but he likes figuring this stuff out. Like I said, he was already hyping up the fucking board with all of the pictures and string connecting them. He likes doing this. Do you think his preference for a boring job comes with age? I laughed. Yeah, that might be it. I think once you settle down and have a family, you just want things to slow down a bit. 2. The rest of the day was uneventful. I didn't have to hear any more of Evan's theorizing, and there weren't any developments in the case of our Jane Doe. We still had no idea who she was or who killed her, and no one had come forward with information. When I got home, Martha was watching the news. If she looked happy to see me, she wasn't showing it. In fact, Martha rarely looked happy these days. Her mouth seemed to be permanently frozen in a frown. But that wasn't the only thing that indicated she was miserable. Her hair had begun fading, with new grays popping up weekly where there hadn't been a single one a year ago. And while she kept going on runs in the early hours of the morning, she had recently put on weight. Not that I mentioned either of these things. But what really gave it away were her eyes, which I could have sworn had changed color. Where they had once been blue, it was almost as if they had receded into a lifeless gray. So I guess this means you're going to be working long hours again, she said without looking up. I looked at the TV where I saw the footage of Dennis giving a statement about the body. Thankfully, I hadn't been in the shot, even though I was standing just behind him. Hopefully not too long, I said with a yawn. That noise was what caused her to turn to me. Tired? She asked in a weird tone. I nodded. Maybe you shouldn't have been out so late yesterday. I could tell she wanted me to interpret this as a question. Maybe, I said. I wasn't going to elaborate on where I had been. I thought the whole point of you taking time off was to spend time with your kids, she said, her voice getting louder. I did spend time with them, I said, but I needed time for myself as well. And keep your voice down. I knew both of our daughters were probably listening in from behind their doors. Make sure they don't see this shit, I said, pointing at the TV. It's fucked up what we found today. When I arrived at work on Tuesday, Evan was already at his desk, scribbling notes as usual. He looked up when he heard me approaching. Oh, you're here, he said. Hey, do you know who that guy is? He asked. What guy? The guy in Dennis's office right now, he said, pointing across the room. The blinds in Dennis's window were open, and I could see that someone was sitting across from him. Even without seeing his face, I recognized the dirty gray hair and the collar of a suit that was obviously too big for him. Oh, fuck, not him, I said. Who is that? Evan asked again. When he comes out of the office, don't approach him, don't even look at him. If he comes up to you, then say as little as possible, I said. But who? I'll explain later, I said as I collapsed in my chair. Evan frowned but didn't persist. Oh, the coroner wanted to talk to us once you got here, about the girl from yesterday. A few moments later, we heard the door to Dennis's office open. Because of the open layout of our office, there was no way to hide. The best I could do was put my head down and hope he didn't recognize me. I couldn't even hide behind my computer screen as the monitor was positioned in a way that wouldn't block my head from view. I did my best not to look up and instead fixated on the sound of footsteps coming from that direction. They got closer and closer, and I just hoped he would keep walking, but instead he came to an abrupt stop. "George!" I tried not to groan at the obviously staged enthusiasm in his voice, but I knew that if I played along this would end faster. I looked up and saw the man smiling down at me as an aroma of cigars attacked me. I stared at the decaying teeth smiling at me and did my best to smile back. "Been so long," he said. "Uh-huh," I answered. He turned around and noticed Evan, who had thankfully taken my advice and not paid any attention to him, but the man shuffled over. "Hi, I'm Benjamin. I don't believe we've met," he said, extending a hand. Evan made the briefest glance over at me as if he were hoping for instructions, but he quickly shook his hand. "Evan, I just started here." "Well, you chose an exciting week to start," Benjamin said, still shaking Evan's hand for an annoyingly long time. "Horrible what happened to that girl. How did someone do such a thing?" Evan seemed puzzled as to why Benjamin would find this amusing. "That's what we're trying to figure out, sir." He seemed unsure whether that last word was necessary. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Benjamin pursed his lips. "Just swung by to talk to the chief. Let him know that if there's anything I can do to help, all you guys need to do is call." "Well, thank you," I said. Benjamin turned back to Evan. "It's going to be nice working with you," he said and clapped him on the shoulder. Then he walked out of the building. "What did he mean by that?" Evan asked. I knew exactly what he meant but didn't feel like explaining it just yet. "I'll tell you later," I said. I could see Dennis standing in his doorway with an expression on his face that showed he was ready to jump off a bridge. "Come on," I said. "Let's go see what the coroner found." I had always thought that if Joel had not been our coroner, he probably would have ended up being a murderer himself. Not only did he physically look like a corpse with pale skin thinly stretched over his bones, but he had a strange fascination with death and talked about it almost as if it were an art form. I dreaded what was about to happen, given that he and Evan were about to have their first conversation together. "Okie dokie," he began once Evan, Dennis, and I were in the room. The still unidentified woman was lying on the table in front of us. I tried not to look at her. I'd never gotten used to that almost peaceful expression Bodies had. Suddenly my eyes noticed the hole in her hand and I felt a shiver. Although I didn't know whether it was from that or from how cold the room was. I rubbed my arms, trying not to make any noise. The last thing I needed was Evan condescendingly asking me if I wanted a jacket. "So she froze to death. It wasn't the crucifying that killed her, it was the cold," said Joel. He kept making this weird clicking noise when he talked, as if he had a piece of food stuck between his teeth and he was trying to tongue it out. "Any idea who she was?" Dennis asked. "Nope. Fingerprints don't match anything either. But speaking of fingers, we didn't find anything under her nails, which was disappointing. I'd hoped there would be something there." "Why?" I asked. "Well, imagine if you were being crucified," he said, his eyes widening. "You'd be kicking and screaming the whole time. Sometimes when there's a violent crime, you'd find the killer's hair or skin or blood under the victim's nails because they were putting up a fight, but nope, not here. It's like she got up there voluntarily." "Maybe he cleaned them for her," said Evan. "No, they weren't super clean. They were normal, I guess. No worse than yours or mine. Which made me think maybe she was drugged and then crucified, but there's no toxins in her system, no marks that would indicate that something was injected." He frowned. "You said there wasn't anything in her mouth, right?" "Nothing," said Evan. "So in addition to all this, she didn't bite off her tongue while screaming in pain as she was crucified. Screams which apparently no one could hear." He turned and looked at the body, and all of our eyes followed. "Yes, sir. Apart from the nail wounds in her hands and feet, she looks like she's sleeping." I turned away. I couldn't look at her for more than a few seconds. Once we left the morgue, Evan and I decided to go for a drive and grab a coffee. Or rather, he decided for us, and I knew he wanted answers about Benjamin. "So here's something I was worrying about," Evan began as we left the parking lot. "If you were going to kill someone, not someone specific, but just a random person because you wanted to feel the experience, who would you target?" I scoffed. "Jesus, man, is this a real question? Who the fuck asked something like that?" "Okay, just hear me out," Evan explained. "You have a family, right? Wife, kids?" I was almost afraid to share with him. This man was clearly unstable, but there was no point in lying. "Yes. And yes, too." "All right," said Evan. "So if somebody killed you, your family would notice pretty fast that you were missing, right?" "Okay." "Me, I don't live with anyone, but I do have a job, and if I suddenly stopped coming to work, people would know something is up. This is why so many killers go after hookers or drug addicts or homeless people. By the time people notice that this person has vanished, it's too late." I understood the point he was trying to make, but I didn't see how it was relevant. "Okay," I said again. "Now, does our Jane Doe look like some junkie or prostitute?" "No," I said. "But you never know." I don't think so, Evan said. And that leads me to my question. Why has no one come forward? Someone knew this person. Someone in this town hasn't seen this person in a few days and knows that the police found a dead body that matches her description. So either she knew no one, or she knew one person and that's the person who killed her, or she's not from here. I finished. Evan took his eyes off the road and smiled at me. Exactly. There's one part that doesn't add up, I told him. Even if this person went out of his way to target someone who wouldn't be missed, any advantage that they had was thrown out the window when he nailed her to a sign for us to find. Yeah, you're right, Evan said. Then he snapped his fingers as you remembered. Oh, I was supposed to ask you, who was that guy we talked to earlier? Benjamin was his name, I think? I sighed. Benjamin is sort of our local career criminal, I said, trying to think of how to best describe him. Long history of arrests, usually things like public intoxication, indecency, DUIs, attempted arson, shit like that. But he's dabbled in some more serious stuff as well. Like what? Evan asked. Benjamin is good at attracting certain people towards him. Like kids who acted up in school, the kinds who, didn't have much of a future, they gravitated towards him. So he'd send them out on assignments, shoplift from a convenience store here, graffiti a building there. But the thing is that certain adults gravitated towards him too. Benjamin ran quite the impressive moonshine operation some years ago, and he had high-stakes poker games in his basement for a while, but we broke that up. Anything really serious? Evan asked. He ever kill anyone? Or no, not that we know of, I said, shaking my head. Not sure he's the type either. He might give you a few smacks if you owed him money, but I don't see him as a murderer. Why did he say he was looking forward to working with me? And why was he in Dennis's office in the first place? I rubbed my temples. Thinking about Benjamin for too long gave me a headache. Whenever something like yesterday happens, we have a dead body and can't figure it out, he likes to pop by and offer his assistance. What kind of assistance? He's trying to aggravate us. He wants to remind us how bad we are at our jobs. Do you think he's involved? Evan asked. Does he know something? We pulled into the parking lot of the coffee chain. No, I said. He's just being an annoyance. Okay, but why did he say he was looking forward to working with you? I finished. He says that to every new cop. And the reason is because years ago one of our guys really was working with him. I said this right as Evan stopped the car and he ended up braking a bit too hard, sending my body forward for half a second. Seriously? He asked. Yeah. We couldn't prove it, at least we didn't have anything that would hold up in court. But we knew. And he likes to remind us of this every once in a while. Not long after, we returned to the station, and just as I was hoping that the rest of the day would be uneventful, I noticed that Dennis was standing in the doorway of his office with an impatient look on his face. Everything okay? I asked. We have a name on the victim, he said. One Vanessa Miles, 26 years old, lives in Albuquerque. I raised my eyebrows. Long way from home? I could hear Evan make a short humming sound behind me, obviously satisfied that he was right about the victim not being from Appleton. Very long way, Dennis said. How'd they ID the body? I asked. A friend came forward and said the victim was visiting her over the weekend. We set her up in one of the rooms when she got here, but I wanted to wait for you two to get back before we started asking questions. The friend, coincidentally, was actually named Jane, which made it confusing for us, as we'd been using the typical Jane Doe to refer to the dead woman before we had her actual name. This Jane, the real one, was sitting in one of our interrogation rooms, curled up and shivering, even though the room was being heated. Evan, Dennis, and I were standing on the other side of the glass looking at her. Her eyes seemed to be fixated on the corner of the room, and I imagined she was wondering whether coming forward was a mistake. So, which one of us do you want to talk to her? I asked Dennis. Or are you going to do it? No, not me, Dennis said. I'm going to stay back from this one. The girl's parents are actually old friends of mine. I'd rather have one of you handle this. Are you worried you'd be biased? Evan asked. No, Dennis replied, but just to be safe. Okay, Evan said as he took a step forward. I'll take a shot. No, said Dennis sharply. You go, he said, turning to me. You don't trust me? Evan asked, seemingly surprised. Dennis stared at him for a few seconds. Are you serious? He asked. But why not? You know exactly why. There was something in the way Dennis said it that was strange. Maybe Evan knew the reason, but I didn't. I wondered whether there was something about Evan that I had not been told. But now was not the time to think about that. She seemed to not even register that I had entered the room. As I walked over, pulled the chair out, and sat down, her eyes did not leave the corner she'd been staring at. The woman's hair looked greasy, her left eye kept twitching, and she looked like she hadn't eaten or slept in days. I'm Detective George Hoffman, I said. She jumped up, startled, just now realizing that I was in the room. But she still didn't look in my direction. The wall behind me seemed more interesting. I understand you were friends with Vanessa Miles, I said. I just don't understand why he would do that, she whispered without actually answering my question. I tried not to react too obviously. Why, who would do that? I asked. She finally looked at me. The person who killed her. Why would he do that? Her fingers started rapidly tapping on the edge of the table. I frowned. I thought we might get something from that he, but she seemed to just be using the word in a general sense. Your friend was from out of town. She was visiting you? Should I have a lawyer? She blurted out, and I looked towards the glass where Evan and Dennis were watching us. You can, if you choose to, I said, really hoping she wouldn't. But you're not under arrest. You can get up and leave at any point should you want to. But if you have something that can help us, we can find the person who did this. She snapped her head back in my direction. Find, she repeated. And then what? That's not going to bring her back. She pressed her head down on the table. I wasn't entirely sure. It could just be sleep deprivation, but I felt she might be inebriated. Or maybe it was just the shock of what had happened to her friend. When was the last time you saw her? I asked. I needed to get something. I knew that behind the glass Evan was already trying to convince Dennis that he would be doing a better job at this than me. She arrived on Friday afternoon. We stayed at my house all night. Saturday we went for a hike, and then we went to Hellhole that night. Hellhole. Well, at least that was a place to start. The club would have been crowded. Someone would have seen them. And what about Sunday? I asked. We woke up pretty late, she said after thinking for a moment. Then we went to Mass, then back to my house. A club and then a church, so that was 2 places. When was the last time you saw her? Jane shook her head like she couldn't remember. Early evening on Sunday. She had gone to pick up beer, and she never came back. Did you think to go looking for her? I asked. I had already been drinking, so I couldn't. You could have called someone else to go looking. No, she said, and she violently shook her head. There was something off here. When you were at your house on the weekend, was anyone else there besides the 2 of you? Any other friends drop by? Nope. And she shook her head again. Just us. I tilted back in my chair and tried to look like I was thinking hard about all of this new information. Okay, I said. When I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me, I could see Evan shaking his head with a strange smile on his face. Well, she's definitely hiding something, I said. Very perceptive, I said. She did give us a name. So that's more than we had 2 hours ago. She says the friend drove to get beer. We haven't found a car anywhere, Dennis pointed out. That's right, I said. What do you think, killer's hiding a car in a garage? Dennis sighed. Who knows? Too many garages to go around and check. But I want you two to look into her alibi. Go to Hellhole and see if they remember her being there. 3. Evan and I left a few minutes later. I decided to drive this time since he wouldn't know directions to where we were going. She seemed a bit off, wouldn't you say? Evan asked as we got into the car. Obviously, but is it because she's traumatized or because she's guilty? I asked. Could be both, he replied. Maybe she killed her friend and is traumatized by that, especially if this was her first. I thought we had established that the person who did this had done it before, I reminded him. Maybe it was a 2-person job. Evan shrugged. I doubt this girl could have lifted her friend up onto the side. And we hadn't established anything. I just figured this was an expert, but that was before this girl came forward. You think she's hiding something? I asked. Evan looked confused. Yeah, I thought you agreed back at the station. I want to hear your thought process, I said as I started the car. For a moment, Evan said nothing. We drove out of the parking lot and began heading in the direction of Hellhole. Her friend just leaves and doesn't come back, and she doesn't seem fazed by that at all, he said finally. You sound unsure, I said. Evan said slowly, I mean, it's weird, right? It is weird, and I agree with you that it feels as though she's not being entirely honest with us, but that doesn't mean she had anything to do with the murder. But then why would she be acting like that? Evan asked. I drummed on the steering wheel for a moment as I thought. Give you an example, I said. Imagine a guy's cheating on his wife, okay? Meets up with the girlfriend in a motel, and afterwards they each go home. The next day he's watching the news, finds out that the girlfriend was killed in a hit and run on the way home. Now, he was most likely the last person who saw her alive, and by knowing where she was the night before, he might have information that can help the police figure this out. But if he comes forward, then they say, how did you know this person? Suddenly his secret affair is in a police report. You see the problem? Okay, Evan said. So she's worried that by coming to us, she's indirectly bringing attention to herself? Might be, I said. Or she might have just been high as shit, and that's why she kept shivering and spacing out. Or maybe the idea of her friend being nailed to a post fucked her up. Who knows? We drove in silence for a while. Eventually, I turned onto a street which had multiple houses with boarded-up windows and doors. Steps leading up to the front porches were decaying and collapsing. The wooden planks covering windows were splattered with spray paint that I couldn't read. Sorry, where exactly are we going? Evan asked. What is Hellhole? Hellhole is a bar at the edge of town which also functions as the town's only nightclub. Ah, he said. It's not a fun part of town. I'd say half of our domestic violence calls are from around here. That, I said, pointing to the house on the corner, used to be a halfway house. And what would 2 nice girls be doing hanging around here? Evan asked dryly. Honestly, I'd say Hellhole is probably safer on weekends than during the week. At least then there's people here. All the kids come here to drink and forget that they're never leaving this town. It's during the day that I'm more concerned about what's here. As we rounded the corner, I saw a man in a white undershirt standing on his front porch, staring at us menacingly. What's he looking at? Evan muttered. We just keep driving, I said. We got places to go. It's just faster this way than going around. The next intersection had a stop sign which had been knocked over. Lovely, Evan said as his opinion on the neighborhood continued to deteriorate. Almost there, I assured him. And if we confirm that they were here that night, then what? I don't know, I said. But maybe they met someone here, someone who took a liking to one of them, someone who didn't take no for an answer, someone who followed them home, I speculated. It's a start. You think she's hiding something? We start by confirming the few details we already know. Thank you for your wisdom, detective, he said. I didn't respond. The building that eventually became Hellhole had been standing here since before I was born. Its structure resembled a tavern from the Old West. The pillars lining the front of the building had been reinforced with concrete, and the entire building had been painted black. Bars covered the windows, and the front door was a bright red that stood out from the rest of the miserable scene. The parking lot was just a plain of dirt, with nothing to indicate parking spots aside from a row of boulders at the very edge. This is the heart of your town's nightlife? Evan asked, raising his eyebrows. I'm sure wherever you came from was much nicer than this, I said. Can't say that it was. As we got out of the car, the front door of Hellhole burst open and a middle-aged man in a tracksuit stumbled out, instantly colliding with one of the large pillars in front of the building. He started breathing heavily as he used the pillar to support himself. I rushed over. You all right, McKinley? I asked. He gave me a thumbs up without looking at me. Do you have a way of getting home, or do I have to drive you again? I asked. He looked up at me and pushed himself off the pillar to show that he could stand up straight. I'm fine, he said as he squinted, his eyes unadjusted to the daylight. I can see that, I said. Not causing any trouble, officer, he mumbled as he wiped the beer foam out of his beard. Just gonna walk this off. And he began slowly shuffling his feet. I watched him as he walked past us and headed towards the road. Quite the colorful group of characters you have living here, Evan said. Maybe he's the killer, he added jokingly. If he was and we had not figured it out yet, I would quit this job, I said. When we walked into Hellhole, my ears were filled with the sound of a nasally voice singing to a synth beat that sounded like a zipper being repeatedly tugged on. We walked down a hallway past a side room that served as a coat room during club nights. At the end of the hallway, we reached the main room of the bar. Hellhole had a miserable aesthetic. The walls were all black, but they had been painted so long ago that they had faded to a boring gray. As we had seen from the outside, all of the windows had metal bars on them, which caused what little sunlight came through them to create a striped pattern on the floor. The room was completely empty except for a group of senior citizens sitting at a round table at the far end. Just beside them was a small room with glass windows which was sometimes used as a private booth by the few people in this town delusional enough to call themselves VIPs. The wooden floor squeaked with each step we took as we approached the bar. The frame of the bar was covered with a long wreath. A row of Christmas lights wove through with about a fifth of the bulbs burned out. Tanner, the owner of this establishment, was busy wiping a mug and repeatedly shaking his head so that the tip of his Santa hat would stop dangling in front of his eyes. Afternoon, Tanner, I said as I leaned over the bar. His eyes widened. A bit early in the day, officer, he said. I smiled. I try not to partake any more, or at least not as much. He nodded. I can respect that, even if it's bad for business. So, what can I do for you? Before I could answer, Evan walked over and leaned on the bar. He was holding his phone in his hand. We were hoping you could confirm whether a few people were here on Saturday night, he said. I leaned over and saw that he had a picture of Jane on his phone. When did you take that? I asked. While we were talking to her, he replied as he flipped the phone to show Tanner. I realized that he must have taken it from the other side of the glass. I tried to imagine how Dennis had reacted to him doing that. Tanner said as he leaned forward and squinted at the photo, flicking the tip of his Santa hat out of the way. Might have, he said. Can't really tell from that image. Name is Jane, if that helps, I said. Tanner's eyes flickered at the sound of the name. He looked back at the phone. Jane, brown hair about this tall, he said, holding his hand up to his chin level. Sounds about right, I said. Yeah, she was here. What about her? Evan asked, and he flipped to the picture of Vanessa's body that he had taken at the crime scene when I first met him. Tanner grew pale when he saw it. Oh, Jesus, is that? Yeah, that's the dead woman we found yesterday. I understand that this might be difficult to look at, but I would appreciate it if you could help us, Evan said. Tanner looked back. He leaned forward slightly and squinted. She was here with someone, if I remember correctly, he said. I noticed his eyes dart towards the far corner of the bar where the group of old people were, as if he were worried someone might notice he was talking to the police. If you remember correctly, Evan repeated. There were lots of people here that night, Tanner began. Yeah, well, one of those people is dead now, and another one of those might be behind it, Evan said sternly. I think two young women go to a club and one of them ends up dead soon after, Evan said. Jane was here, Tanner said. I know that for sure, and she was with a friend. Was it this person? He asked, pointing at the picture. I don't know, the hair looks the same, but she didn't look like a dead body. You're asking me if that, he tapped on the phone screen, was here? I don't know. I frowned. This friend she was with, was it someone you had seen before? Tanner blinked. Now that you mention it, no. Not someone who had been here before. Might have been from out of town, but I can't say for certain. Evan and I looked at each other. It was as close to a confirmation as we would get. And did they meet anyone else here? Did anyone approach them, bother them? Evan asked. Not that I saw. Tanner said. Apparently this wasn't the answer Evan had been hoping for. I wasn't keeping an eye on them in particular, Tanner said, exhausted. Sure, some guys might have approached them once or twice, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. He looked to me for assistance. Thanks for your help, I told him. Come on, I said to Evan and tugged on his elbow before he could argue. Did you try being a little less aggressive? I asked Evan a few minutes later as we drove away. That wasn't me being aggressive, he said. The man was just doing his job. It's not our fault he didn't have all the answers we were looking for, he said. He's the second person we've talked to today that hasn't been giving us straightforward answers, Evan explained. We're not going to get anywhere by being gentle. I only mean that you would be wise not to start building a bad reputation in this town, I told him sternly. We've built a good relationship with the people here. The last thing we need is one bad apple ruining that. Bad apple? Evan asked, turning to me. Is that what you think I am? The first thing I ever saw you do was laugh at a dead body, I said. So you tell me, are you going to cause problems? Evan turned away with a scoff. He didn't answer. In fact, he didn't speak at all until several minutes later when he realized we were taking a different route back. You're right, he said suddenly. We wouldn't want there to be a bad apple in Appleton. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought my knuckles would pierce through my skin. It took all of my energy not to laugh. But then he laughed first, or rather he exhaled loudly through his nose. That was so bad, I said, and tried to disguise my laughs as one long sigh. As we turned onto a side road, Evan looked around confused. This isn't the way back to the station, he said. We're not going to the station yet, I said. We've got one more stop. Where? Girls said they had gone to church Sunday morning, so let's see if that was true. Not long after that, we arrived at our destination. The church was rather modest, with a single bell tower ascending above a small brick building. The bricks were crumbling in several spots, weeds burst out of the long cracks in the stairs leading to the front door, and the sign above the entrance had faded long ago, leaving the letters illegible. I opened the door of the car and noticed that Evan wasn't getting out of his seat. Everything all right? I asked. Maybe it's better if I stayed, he answered, staring out of the windshield at the church. I sighed. I reprimanded you once and you're just going to stay in the car. I don't know if me talking to the priest is a good idea, he said. I didn't know what the issue was, but I didn't feel like asking. When Dennis asked me later how it went, I'd rather not have to tell him that you stayed in the car. He'll be pissed at you, and he'll also be pissed at me for not doing anything about it. So come do your job. Evan turned to me, looking annoyed. For a moment I thought he was planning on arguing further, but instead he undid his seatbelt and got out of the car. Instead of heading to the church, I led Evan to the small one-story house on the side of the property. I rang the doorbell and a few moments later heard loud steps on the other side. When Father Bertrand opened the door, he didn't look surprised to see me. George, he said, and then he turned to Evan. Oh, hello, he said cautiously. Father, this is Evan. We're working a case together. I said, Evan, this is Father Bertrand. Yeah, hi, Evan said as quickly as he could. Bertrand turned back to me. There was a strange gleam in his eyes. I wondered if Evan could spot the single bead of sweat that had appeared at the edge of his graying hair and was now beginning to flow down his head. Of course, please come in, he said with an almost natural smile. Father Bertrand led us into the living room. Aside from the shrine in the corner, which was covered in countless pictures of Christ and popes both current and former, there was barely anything in the room. Just a long bookshelf on the far wall and a small round table stuck between two armchairs. Bertrand sat down in one of the chairs and motioned for me to sit next to him. It's all right, I'll stand, I said. I noticed behind me that Evan was already leaning against the wall with his arms folded. All I could do was hope he wouldn't say anything that would cause problems. Suit yourself, said Bertrand. So, what can I do for you? I'm guessing you heard about the dead woman we found yesterday? I asked. Bertrand blinked. That poor girl. Yes, I did hear about that. He lowered his glasses for a moment to wipe what may have been a tear out of his eye. We managed to get an ID on her from a friend, one Jane Brown. Bertrand twitched just slightly when he heard the name, but quickly smiled. Ah, Jane. Yes, she was just here at Mass over the weekend. That was her friend? He asked, his smile vanishing. Awful. So she was at the Mass, I asked. Yes, Bertrand replied, which was surprising. I hadn't seen her here in a long time. She had stopped going? A few years ago, Bertrand said. Happens with people her age, more and more often, I find. Some of them eventually come back. Most of them don't. Some still show up for Christmas and Easter, although I imagine that's more to keep up appearances for family. But yes, she did come back this past Sunday. And did you talk to her? I asked. No. Was she there with someone? Evan suddenly spoke, straightening up. Someone you didn't recognize? Bertrand frowned. No, she was alone. You're sure? Evan asked. I see the same people week in and week out, officer, Bertrand explained. I have their faces memorized. I know what they sound like. I can even predict who they're going to sit next to. If there's someone new, someone I wouldn't have met before, they'll stick out. Was there anyone anywhere that you didn't recognize on Sunday? I asked. Maybe she sat separately. No, Bertrand said, shaking his head. Just the regulars, and one girl who finally came back after being away. I can't imagine what's going through her mind right now. Evan and I left the priest's house shortly after and began driving back to the station. See, that wasn't so hard, I said. You asked the right questions while remaining professional the whole time. Thanks, he said quietly. No, I mean it, I said, trying to sound friendlier. I didn't even think to ask about Vanessa. I just assumed that if one girl was there, the other would have been too. Here's what I don't get, though, said Evan. She lied to us, but why? Well, we don't know, I said. But like we had guessed earlier, she must be hiding something. No, I mean, why tell a lie that can be obviously disproven? She lied about Vanessa being in the church, a place that is filled with people who, like the priest said, would remember if there was someone new. She had to have known we would have followed up on this, and she had to have known how easily this could be disproven. Maybe she didn't think we'd follow up, I said. Evan didn't answer. When we got back to the station, Dennis was already waiting for us. We found him sitting on the edge of my desk, tapping the back of his foot against it in a repetitive rhythm. Tell me you found something, he said. Is the girl still here? Evan asked. No, she's gone, he said. Left about an hour ago. He must have noticed the look on my face. Why? What's wrong? He asked. She lied. They were both at the club on Saturday night, but she went to church alone the next day. The victim wasn't with her. Dennis raised his eyebrows. And you know this from Bertrand? Yes, I said. I saw Dennis's jaw tighten when I said the name. Okay, he said quietly. I told Ross to follow her. I had a weird feeling we were missing something. I'll call him and let him know to be careful. Do you want us to go to her and ask her why she lied? I asked. No, said Dennis as he got off the desk. Right now, she doesn't know we know. We wait and see what she does next. And he walked away. Interlude. So that first interaction between Evan and Father Bertrand, did you sense any hostility between them? Xander asked. I pondered this for a moment. Hostility isn't the word I would use, I said. I got the sense that Evan seemed to have a general mistrust of priests, which isn't uncommon in his generation. I don't know if a specific incident caused this, I said, choosing my words very carefully, or if it was just an accumulation of things. But Evan knew how to do his job, and Father Bertrand didn't seem to have a problem with him. Xander nodded. And what about the rest of the precinct? Did they have a positive impression of Bertrand? I smiled. You told me at the beginning that you didn't want me to jump ahead in the story. Xander laughed. Yeah, but I just want to get a general feel for how things were in Appleton before everything went to shit. It's like, did your coworkers know Bertrand? Did they talk to him? No, generally you're not supposed to discuss religion in the workplace, I said. But it's a small town, so sometimes you see your coworkers at Mass. Did you go to Mass regularly? Xander asked me. Less and less as the years went by. And what did you think of Father Bertrand? I sat silently for a moment. I think he was a good man. He was really engaged with the community. This wasn't just someone who talked at us for an hour a week and collected money. No, he made it his job to know the people, their names, what's going on in their lives, as much as he could. So you were on a first-name basis with him? Oh, yes, I said. Yeah, he knew me, he knew my family. He even swung by on Christmas every year. He makes his rounds through the town, stopping by to chat. What about his relationship with Dennis? Xander asked. I sighed very softly. To my knowledge, Dennis wasn't much of a churchgoer, so I can't say what their relationship was. And there was no indication that Dennis had any kind of unethical relationship with the father? Xander asked. There was silence. I knew we would have eventually reached this topic, and I gave Xander the same answer I gave every other person who had challenged the story. If there was, we weren't aware of it, I said. Xander narrowed his eyes slightly. He seemed to be wondering whether he could push me further, but before he could, Julie interjected. Can we swing back to Benjamin Narrow for a moment? She asked. Of course, I said. So at the beginning, when you guys had no leads, no idea who could have done this, were there, for a lack of a better term, usual suspects, just a handful of people who you figured maybe it was one of them? I nodded. For certain crimes, yes, we would have. There's days where we would show up at the crime scene and go, yeah, this was probably Benjamin, but not this, not a woman nailed to a sign. See, with Benjamin, you had to look at who the victim was. Back when he was running poker games out of his basement, his justification was that it was a victimless crime. Just a bunch of friends hanging out, having a good time, not hurting anyone, right? Now, for something more serious, like if he torched a cop car or threw a brick through the window at the courthouse, well, now, who's the victim? The government. And they deserve it. Fuck them. Julie and Xander were both nodding. They were getting a better understanding of who we were dealing with. So Benjamin was a terrible person, no doubt, but we knew how to handle him and what to expect. And just violently murdering a random person like that, that wasn't something he would do. So he wasn't on your radar? Xander asked. No, I said. Him coming into the office that first time and taunting us, that was normal. It wasn't something new. For those first few days, we were at a loss. Apart from Jane, there weren't really any leads. Of course, at this point, we also only had the one body. Aside, we had no idea how bad it was going to get. Because from my research, you guys seem to just watch Jane for a few days and hope to learn something from that, Julie added. Right, I said. But the thing is that it was almost Christmas, and the idea of there being a murderer on the loose was understandably scary to a lot of people. Dennis had thought that we should wait and see what Jane does on Christmas to see if someone else visits her. I remember we had been theorizing about whether there was someone who helped her. I'm sure you can imagine that lifting that body up and putting nails in place, that's a lot of physical work. And it was cold too, Xander added. Right, but on Christmas Eve morning, we all agreed that we needed to have something. We couldn't just go on camera and say, Merry Christmas, everyone. We have no idea who the killer is. Don't worry about a thing. And Evan had one of his bright ideas to use this to our advantage as a scare tactic. 4. We scare her, Evan said. We were in Dennis's office on Christmas Eve morning. Combined, we had gotten about 7 hours of sleep. There had been no new developments. Even Ross, who Dennis was forcing to watch Jane's house every day, was getting irritated. She just stays at home, he had told us that morning. All day, every day, no one visits her. If she didn't open the blinds in the morning or shut them at night, I would be convinced that she was probably dead. I'm worried about your idea of scaring, said Dennis with a frown. Okay, later today you give a press release, Evan said. No, just listen for a second, he added hastily as Dennis opened his mouth to argue. You give a press release, and you will have to say that we have no idea who did this and there's a killer on the loose. You don't want to say that. You want people to enjoy their holidays. So you tell the truth, that we have one suspect, and you give the name. That's what we tell her. We tell her that we know she lied to us and we will be naming her as our only suspect unless she can point us to someone else. Dennis had a look on his face that I'd become increasingly familiar with over the past few days. It was a look he gave when he didn't want to admit that Evan had a good idea. Despite his odd personality, our newest team member had proven to be quite capable at his job. Okay, he said, standing up from his chair and leaning over his desk. When Ross gets back, I want you two to go. Ross was back within the hour, relieved that he no longer had to sit in his parked car for hours a day. Anything we should know? I asked. Nothing, he said, exasperated as he rubbed his eyes. She's so boring. She does nothing all day. Evan was already at the front door, but before I could follow him, Dennis grabbed me by my elbow. Are you sure you can control him? He asked. Yes, it'll be fine, I said. I'll do the talking. Dennis frowned and looked over at Ross, who had stumbled over to the coffee machine. Be ready for anything, he said. It's possible Ross wasn't as subtle as he thinks. The girl could know we've been watching her. I think we can handle it, I said, but he was right. She might have noticed the black car parked on her street for several days. What did the boss want? Evan said when I finally came outside and saw him standing at the edge of the sidewalk waiting. Just wants us to be on our toes in case the girl is expecting us. Oh man, can you imagine? He said with a short laugh. First she crucified her friend, now she's luring cops to the house. What will she do next? We got into the car and started driving in the direction of Jane's house. So you got any Christmas plans? Evan asked me eventually. Me? Just staying at home with the family. You? I replied. Nothing really, he said. Probably going to stay in. There was a long silence. I waited to see whether he would continue, but he obviously wasn't going to. You can come over and have dinner with us, I said. Oh, no, that's okay, thank you, but he immediately recited. That's why you asked, I said. You asked me what I was doing because you didn't have any plans of your own. That's not why. Yes, it was, I said. I had my eyes on the road, but I could still sense that Evan looked embarrassed. Is that okay? Like, will your wife mind? She'll be fine, I said. Don't worry about it. It's nothing. Again, Evan sat silently for a moment before adding a quick thanks. Jane lived at the end of a quiet street. We parked on the other side of the road a few houses down. Most of the driveways were still empty as people were at work. There was no car in Jane's driveway, but Ross had mentioned the other day that she didn't seem to have one, as he could still see through the window that she was home. So what's the plan? Evan asked. You want to interrogate her here or back at the station? Back at the station, I said. We don't want to cause a scene. And in the event that someone else is watching her, someone else who might be behind all of this, the last thing we want is for them to see that there were cops in her house. And what if she doesn't want to come with us? Evan asked. Worst comes to worst, we can arrest her. She is a suspect, but I'd rather not. Why not? Evan asked. I've never been crazy about arresting people who might be guilty. I prefer saving it for people who I know are. I said. I don't know, I can't really explain it. No, I get it, Evan said. All right, let's go. When we knocked on the door, there was no response. Miss Brown, please open up, I shouted after a few seconds. Please? Evan asked. And what if she says no? I turned to him, annoyed, but I saw his eyes widen. Curtain just moved, he said, pointing behind me. I turned back around and looked at the large living room window close to the front door, and sure enough, the curtain closest to me was swaying ever so slightly. Miss Brown, we'd like to talk to you, I said, but before I could even finish my sentence, Evan decided to improvise. We know you killed her, he yelled. I spun around. Are you fucking... But then the door opened. I turned back around and did my best to instantly compose myself. Jane looked as though she hadn't slept since the last time we saw her. What do you want? She asked, leaning one hand against the door. Can we come in and talk? I asked. If she even let us into the house now, it would be a miracle. There was no way we'd convince her to come back to the station. She looked over my shoulder at Evan. What did you yell right before I opened the door? She asked. I clenched my fist. If Evan managed to fuck this up, I didn't know what I would do. I yelled what I needed to so you'd open the door, he said. She looked back at me. You can come in. He can't, she said and turned around. I looked at Evan. There was something in his eyes that almost resembled embarrassment. Go sit in the car. Evan opened his mouth to argue. No, get in the fucking car and stay there, I said. I went into the house and shut the door behind me. Jane's house might have once been tidy, but that seemed to have changed once her friend was murdered. The couch had several pillows that didn't match at all, which made me think that Jane had spent most of her time here, likely trying and failing to sleep. The table in the middle of the room had 4 pizza boxes, 3 of which were stacked in a pile, while the 4th one was on its own. This 4th box had empty beer bottles in it, arranged in uniform rows. Have a seat, she said, motioning to the one spot on the couch that wasn't occupied by a mountain of blankets that looked like they had been vomited up. I sat down and noticed something else on the table. There were 3 empty pill bottles. I noticed that the label on one of them read, Insomniac. I'm sorry about him, I said. He gets a little carried away sometimes. I think he might like the job a bit too much. He said he knew I killed her, Jane said. She hadn't bothered taking a seat and was standing on the other side of the table with her arms folded. I wondered whether she was contemplating running. She couldn't run out front. Evan would be there waiting. I glanced over at the patio door at the far end of the room. He said that so you'd panic and do something stupid so he'd have an excuse to arrest you, I said. He doesn't know you killed her, but you are the main suspect right now. She blinked. What are you talking about? She stammered. See, we followed up on your story, and it turns out that Vanessa didn't go with you to Mass on Sunday morning. Jane's face started to turn slightly red. I went by myself. That's not what you told us, I said. Her eyes darted to the back door. Running isn't going to help, I said. It's Christmas, so people naturally want to spend time with their families peacefully and not worried about there being a killer on the loose. We're not going to tell the public that we have no idea what happened. We're going to tell them that we have one suspect, and that's you. No, you misheard me. I never said that she went with me. Let's say that's true, I interrupted. Let's say that all 3 of us misheard what you said. Why don't you help me clear up my memory and tell me what Vanessa did on Sunday morning while you went to church? I could see that her hands were starting to shake. Okay, I said, and I stood up. I'll be heading out then. I took 2 steps towards the door. Wait, she said. I turned and saw that she was starting to breathe heavily. She collapsed on the couch and buried her head in her hands. I know you didn't kill your friend, I said, but you're going to point me towards who did. I walked over and sat down beside her. I went to church by myself, she said, staring at the empty beer bottles. Vanessa went to the hole. She went to the hole by herself, I asked. We were supposed to go together. We were... And then she stopped. She turned towards me. If I say anything, what are you so afraid of? I asked. I'm not afraid of anything, she said with wide eyes. I went to the church. Vanessa went to the hole. Why did she go there? I asked loudly. She shrugged. That's not good enough. What do you want from me? She shrieked. I frowned. You know what I think? I said. I think you know exactly what happened to your friend, and I think you're worried that something similar might happen to you. I could see her bottom lip was starting to quiver. Now, you can either help me figure out what happened, or I'm going to eventually be called to a second murder scene, and I'll have just as little information as I did at the first one. She opened her mouth and tried to speak, but only a weird noise came out. Finally, after a moment, she was able to talk properly. What kind of protection can you offer? I raised an eyebrow. To you? I asked. She nodded. We can have someone watch your house. We can move you somewhere safer. But who exactly are we protecting you from? She took a deep breath and tried to relax, but she was still shaking. Her teeth clattered as she began to speak. I don't know who killed Vanessa. We were supposed to meet someone on Sunday morning at the hole, but I didn't want to. I went to church instead. Vanessa went by herself. Who are you meeting? She looked at me and I could see genuine fear in her eyes. I don't think you killed her, but if you start asking him questions, he's going to know that I told you. Who was it? I asked again. Martin Nero. Interlude. You mentioned already at the time that you hadn't considered Benjamin Nero a suspect, Xander recalled. That's right, I said. What about his son? I took a long sip of water as I thought about the question. I mean, I said, unsure of what we had thought back then. If you told me one of the Neros killed someone and asked me to guess which one, I'd probably say Martin, I guess. But it's still a bit of a stretch, Xander asked. Yeah, especially once you remember the kind of crime we were talking about. Could Martin Nero have angrily pushed someone down a flight of stairs and they cracked their skull open? Sure, I guess. Not the most improbable scenario, but this kind of slow, methodical murder? No, it wasn't like him. And was he similar in character to Benjamin? Xander asked. He laughed when he heard me exhale. His father's son, I said, shaking my head. Same kind of petty criminal, but this extra layer of arrogance. See, over the years, we had arrested Benjamin countless times. There was one thing that always bothered me. Regardless of whether he was innocent or guilty, or even when he knew that we knew he was guilty, he never once asked for a lawyer. He was that confident that he could talk his way out of it. Now, Martin, when he sensed that he was in trouble, the very first thing he would say is, "I'd like to speak to a lawyer," Xander asked. "Nope," I said. "My dad's gonna hear about this." Jesus, Xander groaned and started laughing again. "So he's just the worst type of person," Julie piped in. "The worst," I said, and suddenly felt bold. "Fuck Martin Narrow." "Oh my God," Xander's laughs got louder. "Oh man, should you be speaking that way of the dead?" I did my best to ignore the horrified look that had been on Martin's face when I last saw him. "I'm past caring about that," I said. I drank some more water as Xander slowly composed himself. By the end, he had been almost lying down on the table, but now he had straightened up. "Okay. Shit, what was the other thing I was going to ask?" he said, catching his breath. "Evan's outburst at the door," Julie said as she checked her notes. "Right," said Xander. "So, Evan yelling that you knew she killed Jane. Honestly, man, it worked," I said. "At the end of the day, yes, it was unprofessional, but we did get results." Now, I know I'd asked this earlier when we were discussing the first time you had met him, but you still at this point didn't know why he was transferred. "No, I didn't," I said. "And I hadn't even asked. See, someone being transferred isn't necessarily because of a scandal or some kind of misconduct. It's often something as boring as budget constraints." Right, said Xander. "When did you find out?" I looked up and furrowed my brow. "It would have been after New Year's. Yeah, I don't remember the exact date, but it was after that incident, which we'll get to soon," I said. "And that's when he told you?" Xander asked. "Oh no, Evan and I never talked about this. Dennis told me. When he presented his theory and he saw that I wasn't convinced, this was the evidence he provided." "And had you known earlier, would you have still invited him to your house for Christmas, do you think?" Xander asked. I didn't tell him what I actually thought about that question. "Maybe not," I said with a weak smile. What Evan had or had not done wasn't a concern to me. I could take care of my family. Hey, it's MB Whitehill. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for listening. If you want to support what I do, all of my books, including Town of Liars and its sequel, The False Oracle, are available on Amazon. I will have them linked down below. And I hope to see you in the next one.